Plausible mechanism, but I have yet to hear of anything else proposed to explain it. From quite a few people on the scene, we've been told that the powder it represented most of the concrete, that the amount of intact macroscopic chunks of concrete on the scene were negligible, that basically everything was reduced to powder. And incidentally, we also know that other things besides concrete were reduced to powder. We know that contents of computers, exotic metals from computer chips, these sorts of things were also identified in the dust and in very small particles, generally on the order of less than 100 microns in diameter. So we have a real issue of mechanism as far as what in the process of this collapse could cause so many things to be pulverized so finely. For the towers to collapse the way we saw them collapse basically implies that the columns simply collapsed into themselves. They telescoped straight down. Steel keeps a lot of its structural integrity even when heated. Until you begin to approach the melting point, you don't really see a catastrophic loss of strength, and this is what we're talking about. We're talking about basically vertical box columns collapsing into themselves, which implies a complete loss of mechanical strength. And as far as the initial impacts, this recent NIST study made an interesting point about World Trade Centers. The film analysis showed that it oscillated for about 4 minutes after it was struck by the airplane, and the oscillation rate was identical to what would be expected for the intact tower. World Trade 1 began collapsing from the very top after an hour and 40 minutes. It's very hard to imagine office contents progressively heating up hotter and hotter over that period of time. And for a building to collapse from the very top, which is the least heavily loaded, is also very odd, to say the least. Just a couple of other anomalies. As we know, there were reports of explosions. There were reports of underground explosions in both of the towers at the time of the impact from a building engineer by the name of Philip Morelli. There are interviews with him on the web. From the Naudet brothers film, 9/11, we see that the lobby of the North Tower was extensively damaged with what looks like high explosive blast damage, and this was immediately after the plane collision. But we know that on the weekend before there were power downs, and there appear to have been evacuation drills going on throughout the previous week, which suggests that at least some people knew that something was happening. The power downs may represent a time window in which demolition charges would have been planted, although I think it's possible that they also were planted over a much longer period of time, given the relative accessibility of the buildings.
Scott Forbes, he joins us from across the pond today. Scott, thank you for making time for us.
You're very welcome. Hello.
Let's see, where do we start here? We don't have a lot of time, but I think what we should do first off is, just tell us maybe what the atmosphere was leading up to 9/11, exactly what your job was and what you did there in the World Trade Center towers.
Sure. I worked for, as you said, Fiduciary Trust in the South Tower. I was based on the 97th floor, where our data center was. About 3 weeks prior to 9/11, our company, along with many others in the towers, were given notice that there was going to be a power down in the top 50% of floors in the Southern Tower. This was unprecedented. As you can imagine, a lot of financial institutions in the building, and to have a complete loss of power meant a complete loss of systems. And for an organization like my company, it was truly extraordinary.
I mean, people probably scrambling as soon as they could to secure their systems before the power down.
Yep, that was part of the deal.
Have there been, let me, because for the sake of time, I want to keep this moving as much as possible, Scott. Had there been any power downs like this? Again, you were notified by the Port Authority there'd be a 36-hour power down at the top half of your tower. Had there been anything like this prior to this particular power down, and exactly give us a time frame of when you were notified about the power down as related to 9/11. What was the date of the power down, and had there been one prior to this?
Okay, the power down was on the Saturday and Sunday prior to 9/11, so that would have been the 8th and 9th of September. We were given 3 weeks' notice. It was relatively short time notice period to make all the preparations needed. And it was unprecedented. We'd never experienced a power down in the towers, as far as I am aware. I had worked in the towers from 1998. My colleagues who had been in the building well beyond that could not remember an occasion such as this, apart from the bomb incident in the early 90s.
Well, let's move to this, Scott, because now the power has been down, and you see a number of maintenance workers coming into the building. What was in your mind suspicious or notably suspicious about some of these workers coming in for the power down?
Actually, at the time, I wasn't suspicious at all. It was just part of the fact that there was a power down and that there were workers in overalls in the building.
But looking back now, you noticed that there were some suspicious behavior with these workers.
Well, of course, looking back, you question everything, and you wonder, well, one of the main reasons why I became suspicious was I got in touch with the Port Authority, and I got in touch with the 9/11 Commission to register this piece of information so that it would be acknowledged, if only to be thrown away. And I had no acknowledgement. They did not come back to me. I repeatedly called and wrote letters to them. I've had no acknowledgement. It's as if this information is of no interest to anyone, but to me it seems to be part of the puzzle and should be registered. I was not in the office on 9/11. Because of working that weekend, I had the day off on the Tuesday. And so I was in my apartment, which overlooked the Trade Center. I lived in Jersey City, across the river from the towers, so I was eyewitness to what went on there. And as soon as I saw the first tower go down, the South Tower, I was highly suspicious. It just didn't look correct. It looked like a controlled demolition. It did not look like a building collapsing either from an aircraft hitting it or from a fire inside. It seemed to crumble into dust.
Yeah.
It just didn't ring true.
So what was the cause of the devastating explosive failure that happened at the World Trade Center?
Then we saw secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses.
We heard reports of secondary explosions after the aircraft impacted.
The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself.
Anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
Like, it sounded like gunfire, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden 3 big explosions.